Do not assume this message is meant for you simply because the title found you. There is a better test than that. Chosen one. Notice what happened inside you when you read those words. Maybe your attention sharpened. Maybe something quiet in you asked, "Why does this feel personal?" There are moments when an old truth reaches us at such a precise point in life that it feels less like information and more like recognition. Your literal name was not secretly written on an ancient page, but the pattern you are living may have been described long before you were born. The waiting, the private frustration, the sense that you were made to carry something meaningful, the strange tension of knowing there is more in you, while your outer life still seems slow, unclear, or unfinished. You have felt that tension before. You may be feeling it right now. So, hold one question as we begin. Why can a message spoken to many people feel as if it knows one person completely? The answer is not superstition. It is not about forcing every coincidence into a sign. It begins with something much more grounded. It begins with what has changed inside the person hearing it. Before this message is finished, 3 things will become clear. First, you will understand why old words can suddenly feel written for your present season. Second, you will see why knowing your calling and moving in your calling are not the same thing. There is a gap between them. Third, you will learn a simple way to separate genuine direction from fear, mental noise, and the voices you have borrowed from other people. But I want to give you something useful right now. Think about the last decision you postponed, even though, underneath all the thinking, you already knew what mattered. Maybe you prayed about it. Maybe you felt clear for 1 hour, then the fog returned. Maybe you asked more people, opened more tabs, gathered more opinions, and somehow ended up farther from the conviction you started with. You may have called that indecision. It may be more specific. There is a difference between having the message and having a receiver clear enough to turn that message into movement. I call that the receiver gap. Do not rush past that phrase. Later, you will see what creates that gap, why spiritually sincere people often misread it, and why trying harder can sometimes deepen the fog. For now, remember this. Confusion is not proof that you have been abandoned. Delay is not proof that you are unworthy. Needing clarity does not mean your calling disappeared. If that distinction already describes something you have been carrying, write, "I am ready to hear clearly." Not as superstition, not as a bargain with God. Write it as a decision to stop treating confusion as your identity. Because the oldest part of this message is not the promise, it is the pattern. And once you see your pattern clearly, the rest of this message will read very differently. What happened to you that made you ready to hear it now? Some truths do not become new. You become ready for them. A sentence can sit beside you for years and mean almost nothing. Then life changes you. Loss changes you. Waiting changes you. One day, you hear the same words again, and they land with a force they never had before. Chosen one. This is the first pattern you need to see. I call it the personal letter effect. It happens when an old truth meets a new level of readiness. The words may be familiar, but the person receiving them is not. Your life has supplied context that you did not possess the first time. Think about something you once dismissed. Maybe a parent said it. Maybe you read it in scripture. Maybe a teacher repeated it until you stopped listening. Years later, after disappointment or growth, the meaning suddenly opened. The sentence did not change. You did. That does not mean every emotional reaction is a divine sign. It does not mean every line that gives you chills was placed there specifically by God for your private future. Discernment still matters. But projection is not the only explanation for recognition. Readiness changes perception. When your experience finally gives a truth somewhere to land, you notice details you once passed over. What sounded general becomes specific because you now understand the problem from the inside. Samuel heard his name before he understood what the voice meant. Recognition came before mature interpretation. The lesson is not that every inner impression is Samuel calling in the night. The lesson is that hearing and understanding are different stages. That distinction protects you from two extremes. One extreme says every coincidence is a message. The other rejects meaning entirely. Wisdom lives between them. You can receive a truth deeply while still testing what it asks of you. Here is the test. Does this truth become clearer when the emotion settles? Does it lead you toward honesty, courage, responsibility, and sound character? Does it still make sense after silence, prayer, and reflection? If it does, give it more attention. So, when an old message suddenly feels like your name is written across it, do not immediately ask, "What miracle is about to happen to me?" Ask a better question. What am I finally ready to understand? That question moves you from prediction into participation. You stop hunting for proof that you are special, and you start looking for the responsibility hidden inside what you recognized. Maybe the truth is asking you to forgive. Maybe it is asking you to stop shrinking. Maybe it is asking you to admit that a season has ended. Maybe it is asking you to return to work you abandoned because disappointment made you afraid to hope again. The message feels personal because your life has made the question personal. That is the personal letter effect. The pattern may be ancient, the recognition belongs to this moment, but readiness can explain why you finally hear the message. It cannot explain why you believe it today, then wake up tomorrow unable to move. That gap is where many chosen ones begin blaming themselves. A person can possess conviction, while the receiver, carrying that conviction, is tired, overloaded, and buried under noise. When that happens, the message may be clear, but movement becomes difficult. You can know what matters and still struggle to move. That contradiction is more common than most people admit. You sit down to do the important thing, and your mind suddenly becomes heavy. You remember 10 smaller tasks. You reach for your phone. You tell yourself, you will begin when you feel clearer. Chosen one, this is where the receiver gap becomes visible. The message may be present, the conviction may be real, but the mind carrying that conviction can still be overloaded, distracted, tired, or scattered. When that happens, spiritual certainty does not automatically become practical movement. You may have called it laziness. You may have told yourself that stronger faith would fix it. But sometimes, the problem is not that you do not care enough. Sometimes, your system is carrying so much noise that even a simple decision feels heavier than it should. Notice how specific this can become. You open the laptop and stare at the screen. You know the email you need to send. You know the call you need to make. Yet 10 minutes disappear, then 30. You can scroll without effort, but the meaningful task makes your body feel strangely tired. That does not prove anything mystical is happening. It also does not mean you are weak. It means there is a difference between knowing, receiving, and executing. Those 3 stages can separate under pressure. When they do, you can be sincere and still feel stuck. This is why more information is not always the answer. Another message can inspire you for an hour. Another notebook can give you fresh language. But if the receiver remains noisy, the same pattern returns when the emotion fades. So begin with a simple audit. Ask, what do I actually know right now? Then ask, what am I feeling in my body? Ask, what noise is present around this decision? Finally ask, what is the smallest action that would move this forward today? Do not solve your entire life. Reduce the distance. If the next step is one email, write the email. If it is one honest conversation, prepare the first sentence. If it is 20 minutes of focused work, close everything else and protect those 20 minutes. Picture a quieter morning. Your mind is not racing through 12 possible futures. One important thought rises above the noise. You sit with it long enough to test it. Then you choose one action and complete it before fear can reopen the entire debate. It looks ordinary. Clarity often looks ordinary before it changes anything visible. A clean decision, a protected hour, a boundary kept, a task completed. The person who once waited for perfect certainty begins learning how to move with enough clarity for the next step. If this is the pattern you are leaving behind, write clarity before confirmation. Not because confirmation is bad, because endless confirmation can become a hiding place when the next step is already clear. And there is another layer. Some of the noise inside your receiver did not begin with you. A voice can be repeated around you for so long that eventually it starts speaking from inside your own mind. Family expectations can sound like wisdom. Fear can sound like caution. Religious pressure can sound like obedience. Old disappointment can sound like discernment. That is why the next question matters so much. When you hear a voice inside saying, "Wait, stop, stay small, or do not risk it," how do you know whether that voice is truly yours? Chosen one. Some of the loudest voices in your mind did not begin with you. They were repeated around you until they learned your tone. A warning from childhood, a fear carried by your family, an expectation you absorbed before you were old enough to question it. Over time, borrowed voices can sound deeply personal. This is what I call the borrowed voice. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it sounds responsible. Sometimes it sounds spiritual. It may tell you to wait when you are actually afraid. It may tell you to stay humble when you are really shrinking. It may tell you to keep the peace when a boundary is overdue. The danger is not that every cautious thought is false. The danger is that repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity can feel like truth. If you heard one message about yourself for 10 years, your mind may repeat it automatically even after the original speaker is gone. That is why discernment requires more than intensity. Ask the first question. Does this voice create clarity or panic? Real direction can challenge you, but it does not need chaos to control you. Fear usually multiplies scenarios. It rushes ahead. It demands certainty about every possible outcome before allowing one small move. Ask the second question. Does this voice lead toward character or toward ego protection? A clear direction may ask you to apologize, speak honestly, finish what you started, or leave what keeps harming you. A borrowed voice often protects an old identity because that identity feels familiar. Ask the third question. Does the message survive silence? Step away from other opinions for a moment. Stop collecting more input. Let the emotional charge settle. If the same simple truth remains after prayer, reflection, and quiet, it deserves more attention than the loudest thought in the room. There is an old word often translated as a change of mind. Metanoia points toward a turning, a reorientation that changes how a person sees and therefore how a person moves. The point is not to decorate this message with ancient language. The point is that transformation begins when an old mental pattern loses authority. You do not need to fight every thought. You need to know which thoughts deserve leadership. That distinction can save years of confusion. You can honor your family without repeating every fear they handed you. You can respect spiritual authority without surrendering your own responsibility to discern. And this brings us to something I want you to hold carefully. Over the last several decades, researchers have studied how different systems in the human brain cooperate during attention, creativity, and decision-making. Some of that work reaches back to research recognized by a Nobel Prize. Later, I will show you why that matters here. Not because science can prove your calling, not because a laboratory can measure God, but because the condition of the receiver affects what you notice, what you organize, and what you can act upon. So hold this question. What if part of what you have called spiritual dullness has an address you have never examined? Because once the borrowed voices grow quieter, another truth becomes harder to avoid. You may already know enough to move. The next obstacle, may not be a lack of signs. It may be the place where preparation has quietly become hiding. There is a point where preparation stops protecting your calling and starts protecting you from the risk of using it. Chosen one. This pattern is hard to see because it can look responsible. You keep learning. You keep praying. You keep waiting for one more confirmation. At first, preparation is wisdom. It gives you skill, patience, and perspective. But preparation can become a hiding place when another lesson feels safer than one visible action. The mind discovers that thinking about the step feels safer than taking it, so it keeps asking for more information. This is the last mile. You are not at the beginning anymore. You may have spent years healing old wounds, questioning inherited beliefs, and rebuilding your faith. Yet the final distance between insight and movement can feel larger than everything that came before it. You tell yourself you need another sign, another message, another week to think. But underneath that search, there may be a simpler fear. If you choose, reality can answer. If you act, you can be seen. If you move, the dream stops being protected by possibility. That does not mean you should rush. Some decisions deserve time, but there is a difference between thoughtful waiting and circular waiting. Thoughtful waiting produces clearer criteria. Circular waiting keeps returning you to the same question with no new information. Remember 3 words: clear, choose, move. First, clear the decision until you can state it in one simple sentence. Remove the surrounding stories. Remove the need to solve 5 years at once. Name the actual choice in front of you. Then choose one next step that is small enough to be real. Not the entire business. One proposal, not the entire relationship, one honest conversation, not the complete creative project, one protected hour in which you begin again. Then move before you reopen every argument. Action does not mean certainty. It means you have enough clarity for the next responsible step. For many people, that is the standard that finally breaks the loop. Picture yourself doing this tomorrow. The old questions are still present, but they no longer control the morning. You identify one clear action. You complete it before collecting more opinions. By noon, your life contains one piece of evidence that you can move. That evidence matters. You stop being the person who always prepares to begin. You become the person who begins with what is available and adjusts with wisdom as new information arrives. Earlier, I asked you to hold a question about the receiver. I mentioned research on how the brain coordinates attention, creativity, and decision-making, including foundational work that was recognized with a Nobel Prize. I waited to return to it for a reason. A solution only makes sense after the problem is clear. Insight can be sincere. Calling can feel real. Yet, fatigue, overload, scattered attention, and old mental patterns can still make execution harder. So, here is the missing piece. What if you do not need another message? What if part of the next season depends on supporting the mind that must recognize, organize, and act on what you already know? The next part is not about replacing faith with science. It is about refusing a false choice between them. Insight can show you the door, but a human mind still has to evaluate the step, choose it, and walk through. Why can you understand all of this and still wake up tomorrow inside the same fog? Why can a truth feel clear tonight and difficult to act on by morning? The answer is not that the truth disappeared. The answer may be that insight and execution depend on different conditions. Here is the plain version. The WHY is simple. Readiness helps you recognize a message, but overload can still interfere with attention and decision-making. The what is simple. Clear the choice. Choose one responsible step, then move, before fear rebuilds the maze. And the WHO matters most. You are not becoming a different species of person. You are becoming a returning receiver. Someone learning to support clarity instead of treating confusion as identity. The message can be real. The fog can also be real. One does not cancel the other. Earlier, I mentioned research that helps explain why the condition of the receiver matters. In 1981, Dr. Roger Sperry shared the Nobel Prize for work involving the specialized functions of the two cerebral hemispheres. That research did not prove spiritual calling, and it did not prove any modern audio product. What it did help establish was that the two sides of the brain can contribute differently to human processing. Modern products sometimes build their own theories and methods from that broader history. One product presented in that way is based on what its creators call neural sync technology. Before I name it, consider two stories reported in the product material. A woman from California described years of mental fog and emotional heaviness. She said that after using the audio routine consistently, she felt clearer and more present in her daily life. A man from Texas described a different struggle. He carried work and family responsibilities while feeling mentally scattered. According to his account, regular use was followed by a stronger sense of focus and easier decision-making. These are personal testimonials, not guarantees of what another person will experience. The product is called the Genius Switch. It is a digital audio track designed to be used with headphones for 8 minutes a day. The creators describe it as a targeted auditory sequence intended to support what they call hemisphere synchronization and whole brain activation. It is not presented as a generic meditation track. It is also not presented as a substitute for medical care, sleep, prayer, disciplined work, or professional help when those are needed. It is offered as a structured daily practice aimed at mental clarity. This is not for everyone. It is for the chosen one who understands that spiritual conviction still has to move through a human mind. You can respect the sacred and still support the practical conditions that help you think, choose, and act more clearly. According to the current product material, colleagues once suggested a value as high as $500. The listed price is $49, while the offer page presents an additional reduction to $39. It also lists 4 bonuses and lifetime digital access. Those bonuses include a guided visualization, a grocery shopping guide, a classic manifestation book, and a 5 habits infographic. The offer also states that purchases are covered by a money-back guarantee. Read the terms on the official page carefully before deciding, because prices, bonuses, and conditions can change. The product material says the official version is distributed through its own website, while similarly named tracks elsewhere may not be the same product. If you want to examine it, use the link in the description or pinned comment and review the details yourself. Do not buy it because you think God will punish you if you do not. Do not buy it because a title made you feel chosen, and do not buy it expecting one audio track to make every decision for you. Consider it only if the tool itself makes sense for your needs, your budget, and your judgment. The deeper message remains unchanged. A tool can support clarity. It cannot provide obedience, courage, or wisdom on your behalf. What matters now is that you stop confusing mental fog with spiritual failure. You have a role in caring for the receiver. You also have a role in testing every tool, every voice, and every next step with discernment. A tool can support clarity. It cannot become your calling, chosen one. That distinction matters because the moment a resource becomes a substitute for discernment, you have handed away the very responsibility this message is asking you to reclaim. The deeper work still belongs to you. You still have to notice what is true. You still have to choose what is responsible. You still have to act when the next step becomes clear, even when no product, teacher, or message can remove every uncertainty from the road. So let me say this plainly. Can you move forward without buying anything? Yes. You can begin today with one practice that costs nothing. It is simple, but simplicity is part of its strength because it removes the temptation to hide inside more information. Choose one unresolved question that has followed you for weeks. Write it at the top of one page. Then give yourself 24 hours with no new advice about that question. No new opinions, no new searching, no asking 5 more people what they would do. During those 24 hours, write only what you already know. What facts are clear? What fear keeps repeating? What consequence are you trying to avoid? What would the smallest responsible next step look like if you stopped demanding certainty about the entire future? This is your clarity practice. One question, one page, one day without new input. At the end of that period, choose one action small enough to complete. The goal is not to predict everything. The goal is to discover whether noise has been hiding a decision you already understand. You may notice resistance almost immediately. Your hand reaches for another opinion. Your mind says, one more message will help. Maybe it will. But first, test what happens when you stop feeding the loop and allow your own discernment to become audible again. If the resource I described earlier feels relevant to you, the link remains in the description and pinned comment. Read the details carefully. Decide from clarity, not pressure. If it is not for you, leave it there and keep the free practice. Because this message was never supposed to end at a product. It was supposed to return you to responsibility. The mind can be supported, attention can be protected, but courage still has to become behavior, and behavior is where a season begins to change. Think about the person you were 3 years ago. That person may have needed reassurance. Maybe you needed permission to heal. Maybe you needed time to understand what happened. But the person listening now may need something different. You may need to stop asking whether you are ready and start testing what readiness looks like in action. There is still one part of this message I have not returned to. Why did these words feel as if your name was on them in the first place? The answer is not that you were secretly handed a private prophecy while everyone else was excluded. The answer is more demanding than that, because it places the next move back in your hands. Before we close, I want to name who you are becoming. Not the person who chases every sign. Not the person who fears every silence. You are becoming someone who can receive a truth, test it, clear the noise around it, and then move with what remains. That is why the final part matters. The message is not complete when you understand it. The message becomes complete when understanding changes the way you choose. The pattern was ancient. The recognition is personal. Chosen one. That is the answer we have been building toward from the beginning. The words did not need to contain your literal name for them to meet the exact question your life has finally taught you to ask. Waiting is ancient. Fear is ancient. Calling is ancient. The struggle between preparation and action is ancient too. Human circumstances change, but many human patterns repeat across generations. That is why an old truth can feel almost impossibly current when it reaches the right season. You are not being asked to prove that you are more chosen than someone else. You are being asked to become more responsive to what is true. That identity is quieter. It does not need superiority. It needs attention, discernment, courage, and enough humility to test what you think you hear. I call this identity the returning receiver. You are not returning to childhood because childhood was perfect. You are returning to a quality of attention that existed before fear, disappointment, and borrowed voices crowded every decision. The returning receiver does not chase every sign. This person listens, tests, and moves. The returning receiver does not call every delay rejection. This person learns from timing without turning waiting into an identity. And now I want you to experience this instead of only thinking about it. Sit in a way that lets your body soften. Let your shoulders drop. Place both feet on the floor if you can. Take one slow breath and allow the next few seconds to become quiet. Imagine a simple table in front of you. Nothing dramatic. On that table is one message. You do not need to see words written across it. You only need to know that it represents the question your life keeps bringing back to you. Do not ask what is going to happen to me. Ask something smaller and stronger. What is mine to do? Let one answer rise without forcing it. Maybe it is a conversation. Maybe it is a boundary. Maybe it is work. You need to begin again. Maybe the answer is rest. Whatever appears, do not turn it into a prophecy. Treat it as something to examine honestly. Now notice your body, your chest, your jaw, your hands. Feel where tension appears when you imagine taking that step. Do not fight the tension. Let it tell you where fear has been living. Take another slow breath. Press your feet gently into the floor. Remind yourself that clarity does not require the absence of fear. You can feel uncertainty and still choose one responsible action. This is the shift. You stop asking for a message that removes all risk. You begin becoming a person who can receive enough clarity to move with wisdom. The message stops being entertainment. It becomes a choice. Stay with me through the final declaration. There is one last loop to close. Why did this feel like your name was on it? Because recognition becomes personal when truth meets the exact question you are finally ready to live. Chosen one, this is where the message becomes a decision. You do not need to carry fear of missing your destiny into the next season. You do not need to treat every delay as evidence against you. You do not need to chase endless signs just to feel safe for another day. Release the shame around the time it took you to understand. Release the comparison that tells you everyone else received their answer first. Release the belief that confusion has become your permanent identity. You can honor what the waiting taught you without building a home inside it. Receive something more grounded now. Receive clarity for the next step. Receive patience for what cannot be rushed. Receive courage for what has already become clear. Receive discernment strong enough to test a voice before you obey it. And say this quietly if it belongs to you. I am not abandoned because I have questions. I am not late because my path took time. I can hear without panicking. I can discern without chasing. I can choose without knowing every outcome. I can move with what is clear. That is the identity this entire message has been building toward. Not a person who knows everything. Not a person protected from every mistake. A person willing to listen carefully, think clearly, choose responsibly, and move when enough light is present for the next step. So, let us close the question that opened this message. Why did these words feel like your name was written on them? Because the words met the exact question your life had finally taught you to ask. The pattern was ancient. Your recognition was personal. The truth did not need to predict your private future to become relevant to your present life. It only needed to illuminate a pattern you were finally ready to see. And now the primary loop closes. Ancient pattern meets present readiness. Present readiness creates recognition. Recognition becomes discernment. Discernment becomes a choice. And a choice, repeated with wisdom, becomes a different way of living. If this is the decision you are carrying forward, write, I will hear clearly, choose wisely, and move. Let those words mark responsibility, not superstition. Let them remind you that you do not need another 100 confirmations to honor the next honest step. Share this message with someone who has been calling themselves lost, when they may simply be overloaded, afraid, or standing at the last mile. And if you want to continue walking with messages like this, stay close. But do not leave with only a feeling. Before this day ends, identify one question, clear the noise around it, choose one responsible step, and complete it. Let the message become movement. You were never asked to control the whole road. You were asked to become faithful with the light you can actually see. Hear clearly, choose wisely, move with courage,